the idea of self. It is perhaps one of the most important ideas within our current political climate. The idea of protection of self, liberty, freedom, and at its worst, anarchy, is often in opposition to the ideas of community, sacrifice, the greater good, and, at its worst, authoritarianism. It's one of the many debates that remains timeless within politics. From the 1800s to the 21st century, you see this debate ongoing, a connected line of debate that has gone on for centuries and will continue long after all of us are gone. It is in self-isolation I sat and thought about these ideas of self, almost ironically even, considering that we were all sacrificing these ideas of self, liberty, and freedom to self-isolate and protect the community. As a younger generation, we often feel the brunt of these policies. These coronavirus restrictions were needed, nay, a sacrifice required, that we all made. But we as the youth often are the ones that suffer for the greater good. How many times have we been told to suffer pain and inconvenience because I say so? How many times has a child been ignored or even berated for speaking of the problems they have or problems they see within society? How many times did you hear as a child, you personally hear as a child, you're too young to understand, or even the good old don't talk back? Our adults, our heroes, the ones we look up to, inherently have a developed idea of self. We see the ideas of self are explored with reverence and with admiration in all the media that we consume. Yet a child is raised to support the ideas of community, tradition, and collectivism. These traditional hierarchies of family are apparent, and we are told to follow these hierarchies to the line. Consistently within these settings of family or school, we are taught to value the community and collectivism over the self. We are taught otherwise would be excessive narcissism, and such narcissism is punished. We are told to conform and to follow, to ignore the self or any ideas we might have otherwise, to follow a presented line. We as a democratic society hold the idea of liberty and self as a core tenet. We emphasize the self as important. We generally agree hierarchies and authoritarianism are bad. It's why we are a democracy. But at the same time, we enforce authoritarianism hierarchies on children. It creates an inherent paradox within the minds of the youth. Why does, when a child experiences such injustice, it's seen as justified, while at any other age it would be seen as a terrible injustice? In any other setting, it would be a terrible injustice. We see our heroes participate in rebelliousness and indulgences of self. I admit that in self-isolation, when I was supposed to be doing schoolwork, I watched many films where this can be seen. Star Wars, any World War II film, we see heroes fighting for liberty and the freedom to express the self against authoritarianism, against collectivism. Yet when we try to do the same as youth within society, we are consistently punished by the school, by family, and by society as a whole for even entertaining the idea of self over community. I am not saying that everything should be overturned. I just want to make that clear. There are situations that require hierarchy and authoritarianism. That's just a fact of life. Within family is required to raise a child. When a child makes a mistake or does something inherently wrong, they should be punished for it, obviously. And admittedly, discipline is required to keep a school functioning properly. That's not what I'm arguing about. What I'm arguing about is when a child is berated and even hit for speaking their mind. When a child chooses to protest or fight back against what they see as a problem, they should not be punished. Regardless of what you personally think on what they are saying, instead of approaching that protest with hatred and punishment, I ask you to approach it with empathy and to try and explain why you believe what you believe and why you differ on your stance with the child. Maybe you will even learn something. I believe, as a society, we should not be okay with the fact that the vast majority of children and even teenagers will not speak up to their adults because they are scared of being berated for it. That is why I would like to call on the local government to allow indulgences of the self, to expand youth voice within the community, to extend the voice of the youth and let them talk about their problems, to not berate and to not try and punish children. for speaking what they see as problems. Maybe it's impractical or even impossible to give such concessions, but one will never know with certainty that it can function without at least trying. And on a personal level, to every family that's either listening or watching, I ask you to entertain the ideas of listening more, to give children and teens, such as myself, the ability to express their minds without fear of retribution, to allow us to become the self and the I, instead of the we of collectivism. All adults have indulged the self. It's time that we let the youth do the same. It's time to change the way we view and treat the youth within Australia. It's time we let them speak. Thank you.